Bintu Agne. Hi, how are you? Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's Friday. What is our date? It's February 5th. It's February 5th, Friday. You made it to Friday. You made it through the week. And I'm super grateful to you for joining me today. Super excited to be talking today to Adam Grant. His new book is called Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And I have to say, I can't remember the last time I got this excited reading a book. I started it and I could feel myself getting excited because I was like, I need to unlearn everything. I already feel like I am unlearning. I already feel like I am in this space of unknowing, in this space of uncertainty, as is everybody else. Everything I thought was so, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I wrote about that last week in the Sunday paper, the lies that we all tell ourselves about ourselves, about our situations, about our government, about our jobs. And then lo and behold, this book comes along. And I just started dog-earing it. You know what that is? Underlining it. It's so interesting and it's so timely. He has a quiz in there, quiz on his website, and we posted it to how open are you? How open-minded are you? How open are you to hearing other people's points of view? How open are you to unlearning? Isn't that incredible? How open are all of us? Can you please repeat the title? Yes, I can. It's called Think Again by Adam Grant. He has some really great blurbs on the back of it. Brene Brown writes, "This is the right book for right now. Yes, learning requires focus, but unlearning and relearning requires much more." That's so true, and it's backed by evidence. He spent a lot of time thinking about how to be open, how to unlearn what we know, and about mental resilience, about the skills that we need for this time in our country. Good morning from school. Good morning, everybody. Think Again by Adam Brown. Yes, people are writing that down. Think Again by Adam Grant. So I don't know if Adam is here, but I wanted to just kind of come on. Lisa, so try unlearning to be more open. That's great. I think we all have to look about how we can be more open because clearly, there's a lot of different views out there, and more open. If we want to bring our country together, if we want to bring ourselves together, we've got to be open to be wrong. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Maria. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. So nice to see you.
Likewise. I hope you don't rethink that.
Yes. I was just saying before you came on, I could feel myself getting excited, literally in my body when I started reading your book. I got excited that we could all be allowed. We're giving permission, you're giving us permission to unlearn, to rethink. And I took the quiz last night. How open am I? I don't know if my scores were good or not, but I wanted to start with you, Adam, kind of why this book is the right book for right now. I was just talking here about COVID, about how we all had to rethink everything. What do you want this book to do right now?
Well, thank you, Maria. That's so kind of you. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. Is 2020 was really the year of forced rethinking for so many of us, right? Nobody wanted to rethink whether it's safe to eat in a restaurant or to hug their grandkids or grandparents, or whether they could get work done from home while they were busy homeschooling their kids online. And my hope is that 2021 is the year of more intentional, more deliberate rethinking, where we actually get to choose what we question, whether that's knowledge we held, assumptions we made, or just opinions that might not be serving us well.
So how do you go about rethinking? And you write in the book, like, that's scary to people because our identity is so tied to our beliefs, or I think this, and therefore what I think is who I am. So if you're saying to us, rethink, unlearn, put your beliefs up there and be willing to change them, then we maybe end up questioning who we are.
Yeah, that's a risk. And it's not always a bad thing, right? Sometimes you find out that you're still attached to identities that no longer make sense for you.
Right.
I've seen this over and over again with my students at Wharton, where they fall in love with a career path at 21. And then I hear from them sometimes when they're 28 and 29 saying, I wish I had reconsidered that sooner because I didn't necessarily want to be a banker, but I didn't know what banking was yet. And I waited too long to hit the reset button. And now I feel like it's too late. For me, one of the starting points is just to make sure that you have a support network, of course, but also a challenge network, a group of people that you trust to poke holes in your logic and really look out for your best interests. And I don't think we listen to enough of those thoughtful critics in our lives.
So have a challenge network. That's really interesting. I like the idea of that. So these are people that you throw an idea out against and they butt up against you?
Exactly. I ended up assembling one when I was writing Think Again. I reached out to some of my most thoughtful critics and I said, look, I haven't always taken your feedback well, but I've always valued it. And you've really pushed me to question some of my own assumptions, which makes my work better. What I'd love is if you can read this draft and tear it apart. And I know people are going to find the flaws in my arguments anyway. So if you can help me catch them in advance, then I can try to improve them. And something really interesting happened when I invited people to do that. They started to take on the identity. And they said, oh, this is part of our relationship. I'm not going to hurt your feelings if I challenge you. I'm going to disrespect you if I don't challenge you. And it means I've gotten a lot more constructive criticism.
And so how did you change? What have you unlearned in this process? What are you rethinking?
Well, one of the first things that happened was last year, after years of telling our kids we would never get a pet, we got a cat. That was a lot of rethinking for me because I've always liked animals, but I never quite thought they belonged in a house. And I thought, okay, maybe I should be open to rethinking that. It ended up being really good timing right before the pandemic started. And I asked our daughters afterward, how did you get me to rethink that? Because I wanted to learn from how they approached it. And one said, well, I gave you a bunch of reasons. And the other, who's 9, said, puppy dog eyes works every time.
But what I think in the book is, I love the example where you talk about the SATs. And I was always under the assumption that, your first answer is the right answer. I had been told that all my life. And you kind of debunk that. What Adam says in the book is that people, always think their first answer on a multiple choice thing is the right answer. And that when they go to rethink it, they'll make a mistake. And the evidence shows that that actually isn't true. And can you find evidence about everything like that in your life?
I tried to. That one was particularly interesting for me because, I think there's a gospel that says you should trust your intuition. Mm-hmm. And I think we're better off saying, you know what, maybe I should test my intuition. Because Maria, when I think about intuition, it's just subconscious pattern recognition. And I don't know whether the patterns I've recognized from the past are relevant to the situation I'm in or not. And so whether I'm taking a test or making a big life decision, I want to know, is my past experience actually appropriate for the choice I have to make in front of me? And I think making that intuition explicit so that you can understand where it comes from is a critical step.
But isn't that, some people are saying, like this is going to cause incredible anxiety, and people are already suffering from incredible anxiety. They're just, everything feels like it's moving under their feet, right? They thought the government would be able to handle COVID. Wrong. They thought the government would get them the vaccines. Wrong. They thought their job was stable. Wrong. Maybe they thought their marriage was stable. Wrong again. And these things are really ground shifting. So it's one thing to say, test it, rethink it, unlearn it. Sounds good, but aren't you leaving people in like really unsteady, unstable places?
I think that's a risk if you rethink everything in your life, right? That's not what I want people to do with this book. The goal is not for you to question every single principle you've ever held dear. Mm-hmm. It's to say, I think, something much more modest, which is it's worth a little bit of anxiety to avoid a lot of regret. If you look at what people regret looking back, most of us, the things we wish we could redo are the moments when we stuck to convictions that didn't make sense anymore. And it's easy to see those in hindsight, right? We catch ourselves and say, you know what? Yeah, that was the wrong person to be dating, or that was the wrong toxic culture to join. And if we could, I think, catch those moments up front more often, even though it might be a little uncomfortable, then we end up living with fewer regrets.
A lot of people I have found say like, oh, I have a really open mind, yet they don't want to hear from anybody who has a different political opinion from them. They think they're the patriotic one. They're the right one. There is only this way. How do we get people to be open-minded in a way? Because that's really the only thing that's going to bring our country together again, right? That this, if you're in this 70 million and then you're in this 70 million, how do we open our minds to consider maybe the other side has a point of view that might be helpful to us, that's not so threatening to us?
Well, I used to think that the answer was we needed to see the other side more often because too many of us are stuck in filter bubbles and echo chambers, and we need to break out of those. And now I have a different view. And I guess this is something I've rethought in a pretty fundamental way. I think seeing the other side is actually not a solution to polarization. It's actually part of the polarization problem. Because most of the issues that people disagree on are extremely complex. Yeah. There's a lot of nuance, right? It's a whole spectrum. And when we talk about one side and the other side, we oversimplify that. Psychologists actually call that binary bias. It's the tendency a lot of us have to take a really complex continuum and say, well, it's easier to understand it and talk about it if we just look at the two extremes. And when we look at those two extremes, we're forgetting that most people are somewhere in the middle. So let's take an issue like guns, for example. You have gun rights and gun safety activists on opposite sides, and they don't think they see eye to eye at all. But close to 90% of Americans across the political spectrum favor universal background checks. Right. And if we start there, we can say, you know what? I'm not just looking at another side. What I'm doing is I'm trying to recognize that people might have different opinions on a bunch of issues within this issue. But
isn't it that, I talk about that a lot on that specific subject, and there's so many subjects like that. But when you get down to trying to craft policy, or our language doesn't keep up with our thinking. So if we all agree on that, then we go to the next step and we're like, okay, we're apart now. Or we can't find a way to craft the legislation on the common ground, be it about that or really anything else. So how do we keep pushing, or how does our language catch up to this thinking?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I have a silver bullet on that, Maria, but I think at least the place I would begin is to say, anytime somebody talks about one side and the other side, we have a responsibility to ask, what's the third perspective that's missing from this conversation? What's the fourth viewpoint that we haven't heard yet? And there's this set of experiments that I love by Peter Coleman and his colleagues, where they actually introduce people to the gun issue. And they say, look, here's what gun rights activists like, here's what gun safety activists believe in. And then they ask them to talk about a different topic that they disagree on, which is abortion in many cases. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that about 45% of those people will actually agree on abortion after they see both sides of the gun debate. And that sounds pretty good. But there's another version of that conversation about guns that leads 100% of people who started out disagreeing to agree on abortion. And that's, instead of describing the gun issue as this one side, other side thing, taking the same information and describing it as multiple lenses through a prism. And saying, look, here are all the different groups that exist on guns. And you might think you belong to one, but actually there might be 7 or 8 of these. And when you talk about amplifying complexity in that way, people say, you know what? Maybe my views don't align perfectly with the group that I thought I was part of. And I'm going to be a little bit more open in my own thinking. So how do you
so that you're applying how to be kind of more open in your thinking politically? How do we do that in terms of in our families, in our lives? So we may have family members, that have different political opinions. We may have spouses or partners who are closed off, who have rigid thinking. And instead of saying, hey, be open-minded or change your point of view, what's the right approach? What should our language be, our tone be, to bringing people to the kitchen table and getting up with a different result?
The kitchen table might be the wrong place to have this conversation, but
okay. Where is the right place then?
I'm not sure if there's a right one, but
really,
I think that at some level, the thing I worry about most is that people end up in preacher and prosecutor mode. Yeah, I'm right.
That was wrong. Unfortunately, I took the test and I became a preacher and a scientist. What does that say? Adam has a how open are you test, and I got preacher scientist.
That's not a bad thing.
Oh, it isn't? Okay.
No. So let's just do a quick walkthrough of the different modes and then talk about what they mean. So when you're preaching, you're obviously proselytizing to everybody else. When you're prosecuting, you're trying to convince people that they're wrong and win your case. Then there's a politician mindset that we also find is pretty common, where people are essentially trying to get the approval of a tribe that they belong to. And what I was worried about, Maria, is that when you're preaching and prosecuting, you're not willing to rethink your opinions and your beliefs, because I'm right, you're wrong. My job is to get you to change your mind, but I'm going to stand still. And as you know from the illustrious career you've had, when people are in politician mode, one of the mistakes that they make is they do seem more flexible, but they're not doing it because they're trying to get closer to the truth. They're just telling their constituents what they think they want to hear.
Yeah.
And so one of my aspirations is for people to think a little bit more like scientists and recognize that when you form an opinion, that's just a hypothesis. It may be true, it may be false. And what you need is information. It might be data, it might be observations, it might be experiments to try to test your hunches and figure out whether they actually make sense in the world around you.
I'm really interested that you just said that the kitchen table is not the place to have this discussion. I actually want to drill down on that, because I think we're all looking, right? Everybody's on Zoom, right? And so where is the place? And as a mother, I actually believe the kitchen table is my space and place, right? Or my home is my space and place to try to talk to my kids or talk to people that I see. You know, I wonder, like, how do we talk to one another without triggering one another, without threatening one another? And where is that safe place to have that conversation? We've got to be able to have a safe place.
Yeah, there is evidence that people are a little more cooperative when they're breaking bread. And so it's possible that the kitchen table is a good place to go. What I worry about, though, is that people start out just expecting to have a civil conversation, and then it goes off the rails pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So I think we need to have a conversation about the conversation, right? A meta conversation before we dive in. And Maria, where I like to kick that off is just to say, look, I know a lot of people have contentious feelings about this topic. Not everyone is going to agree. And that's actually a good thing, because I value diversity of thought. And I also know that when I get passionate about an issue, sometimes I sound a lot like a prosecutor. And that's going to make it seem like I'm stubborn and I'm not open-minded. And I don't want to be that person. If you catch me doing that, please let me know. What that does is it signals my openness, and it encourages the other person to follow suit. And it's a lot easier then to not take the discussion personally, and also to have a thoughtful conversation.
So what you're saying, it's not necessarily, so like you can have it at the kitchen table or in the family room, but what you're giving us is language, words to precede the conversation. So, hey, I would like to talk about patriotism, or I would like to talk about climate change, and I want this to be an open conversation. And if you find me pushing you or proselytizing, call me on it. And I want you to check my tone. And I don't want to be a fighter in here. I want to learn from you. I want to be open to unlearning. I want to be open to rethinking. And I want to invite you into that process. I want you to be in my challenge group.
I love the way you just described that. Yeah, the point is not to argue to win, right? It's to have a conversation to learn.
Yeah.
And I think that when you do that, one of the things you notice is sometimes the mistake that you're making, and I've done this over and over again throughout the past year, is you're talking in the language of your values as opposed to trying to understand the other person's values. So let's take anti-racism and climate change as two issues that liberals are often struggling to get conservatives to hear them on. I think one of the mistakes we see is that those issues are talked about in terms of liberal values. So with anti-racism, it's all about equality and justice. What if instead you appealed to more conservative or cross-cutting values, like let's give everyone opportunity and freedom? Same thing with climate change. Climate change is talked about in terms of compassion, which is a more liberal value. If you were liberal and you wanted conservatives to hear you on that, one of the things you could say is, you know what, protecting the planet is a patriotic duty, or we have a responsibility to protect God's earth. And those motivations, right, allow you to say, you know what, I don't have to shove my values down your throat. I can actually explain what's important to me in a vocabulary that already makes sense to you.
Right, but so many people, Adam, like I'll sometimes find myself saying things like that, and people are like, you're not angry enough. You're not fighting for your space enough. And we don't need centrists. We don't need people in the middle. We need people on the side who are going to fight. And it's good to have anger. It's good to have that to fuel. So what would you say to that people, say like, I want you to have an open mind. I want you to have an open heart. I want you to hear me, but damn, you're not, fired up enough. You're not fighting for your position, and we don't need centrists. We don't need, and you see that going on, I think, a little bit with the president, right? He's trying to go down the middle, and he's getting hit from his own party on the left, and he's getting hit on the right, and people are like, I don't want the center. But then everybody says, I want the center.
Yeah, I have so many reactions to that. I think, frankly, this is a good example of the kind of complexity that I'm trying to amplify.
Yeah.
Right. We know on the one hand that righteous indignation is part of the motivation for social change to happen.
Right.
And there is such a thing as not being passionate enough or not being angry enough, because that can kill the will to act. And it can also mean that other people don't listen to you because you don't speak loudly enough. My biggest concern, though, is that when people get angry, they're usually angry at people who violently disagree with them. And those are the people who are the most likely to resist in the face of being attacked. And so what I want to do is pivot a little bit and say, look, think of this less as a war and more as a dance, right? You can't lead every step of the way. You have to let your partner lead some of the time too. You have to be willing to sidestep, not just step forward. And I think one of the ideas that led me to is, this is another finding from Peter Coleman's research, that I always thought we needed to dampen down the emotion when things do get heated. He finds that in productive, difficult conversations, there's not less emotion, there's just a wider range of emotion. So people are angry one minute. Yeah. So people, you might get mad because somebody's not hearing you, or you think that they're violating their integrity. But then you're actually still curious enough to ask them, well, how did you come to that belief? Or how do you think your preferred policy would work in practice? And that curiosity gives them an opportunity to also be curious. And then you might get frustrated because you don't make any progress. But then you start to get a little bit hopeful when they outline a time when their beliefs had changed a little bit. And you say, well, maybe this person could rethink some of their opinions. It may not all happen in one conversation. What I'm doing here is planting seeds. I think we probably need to give ourselves and the people around us the permission to feel and express a wide range of emotions, because the first emotion that you feel and show, that's just a rough draft, right? And I would never publish my first draft of a book. I would never frame my first draft of artwork. What I want to do is take a step back and say, well, what does the second and third revision of my emotions look like? And that might lead me to a different emotional zone.
I think also what you're saying, Adam, is when I'm thinking about it is, this needs time. Mm-hmm. We're all in such a hurry, right? I work in the media, have for the last 40 years, and everything's like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, next. The guy's in your ear, or the woman's in your ear saying, okay, wrap it up. And we're just on the surface, right? And we're all in a hurry. And there's a lot of research, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when we slow down, when we kind of calm down, we hear differently, we speak differently, we start mirroring our body energy to the other person. Isn't that a big part of this? Because what you're saying, this is complex. So you can't do it in like, I'm going to give you 2 minutes and work it out.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. And I might just add that you come from a profession that rewards people for thinking fast and shallow.
Yeah.
And I think we need more conversations where people are encouraged to think slow and deep.
Yeah.
And for me, part of that is, I've been in well, I mean, it's sometimes easier said than done, but I've been in too many conversations where somebody has just said, well, let's just agree to disagree. And that's a knee-jerk reaction when you don't want to jeopardize a relationship with somebody that you just can't see eye to eye with. And at some point I decided that agreeing to disagree actually disrespects our relationship, because it says, you know what, despite the fact that we care about each other, we are unwilling to really hear each other, and we're unwilling to open our minds a little bit to each other. And I'm not okay with that. So when somebody says that now, what I've started doing is I've started saying, you know what, actually, I don't want to disagree. I don't want to agree on disagreeing either. What I'm here to do is to learn. And so it seems like this conversation hasn't really made any progress. Can you give me some feedback on how I could have approached it differently so that we might have had a more constructive discussion? And
yeah,
it's
I think
so helpful.
I love the idea of slow and deep, rewarding slow and deep. And I think also we have to, you talk about the profession I work in, which is the media, where I come from. I also come from politics, right? And so the people in politics are crucified when they change their opinion, when they rethink. And everybody goes, you used to say, you said this. And I always, as a child of politics, having been First Lady, I always said, why don't we allow life to impact that person? Why don't we want to elect people who have been changed by life, who have rethought their position? Why do we condemn people for having an opinion in their 20s that's different in their 50s? Don't we want that? So how do we as a society, it's really, the media, political people, the audience, how do we allow people the grace space to change their mind and not attack them for doing so?
I think you hit the nail on the head. We need to think differently about who we reward and what we hold up as virtuous in our society. Yeah. You know who was a great flip-flopper? Abraham Lincoln.
Tell me.
Lincoln came into office believing that it would tear the country apart if he tried to abolish slavery. And how lucky are we that he changed his mind? Now, what I think is fascinating about Lincoln's story is he didn't change his values, right? He always stood for trying to create opportunities and advance justice and freedom for all. What he was flexible on was his policies. And I think that's the difference between flip-flopping and rethinking. Flip-flopping is saying, you know what, I'll abandon my principles, my values yesterday no longer matter to me today. Whereas being flexible is about saying, look, I have a core set of values that are important to me, and I'm going to hold on to those. But I don't know the best way to live those values. And so I'm willing to run experiments and do trial and error policy.
But what's the way? You called him a flip-flopper. And then, so what is since we live in a world where people want to characterize, how do we characterize Lincoln in a way that we can emulate? So nobody wants to emulate a flip-flopper, but you just said it further down in the conversation. Lincoln was someone who held his values, but was open-minded enough to rethink his policies or rethink the way to get to his values. Is that what?
Yeah, exactly. I think that if you look at Lincoln, his values were his identity, right? So he's going to stay true to his principles, but he's going to stay flexible on his practices and his beliefs.
So hold your values. So you want to be a rethinker, not a flip-flopper.
Exactly. Oh, I love the way you captured that. That's perfect.
Yeah. So I think that that's a thing that we can, we can aspire to, right? How do we become rethinkers in our politics, in our positions, without degrading ourselves as flip-floppers, right? Because, pushing up against that, I'm not flip-flopping, I'm rethinking, I'm being open-minded, I'm trying to relearn, and I'm trying to consider that I may have been wrong in the way I approached that and in the way I dealt with it, and that's a good thing.
Yes, I love that. And I guess the only thing I would add to that is to say that you don't have to change your mind every time you rethink. Being a rethinker means you're open to reconsidering, but you might end up concluding that your original opinion was right or was the closest you could get to the truth right now. And that's okay, right? You just want to be open to re-examining.
So I think that I would encourage people to take the test that Adam has. How open are you? It was kind of interesting to me, and it's very easy. It takes 5 minutes to take the test, and kind of triggers things in your mind. And the book is called Think Again: The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. And there is so much that all of us don't know. And the fact is, things keep changing, or science presents us with new science or new data for which would normally make us rethink, like, wow, maybe I was wrong about that. And it's okay to be wrong, right? It's okay. You're not a bad person.
No, you're someone who values learning. When I find out I was wrong, it means I have grown.
It means you have grown. Great. Well, Adam Grant, thank you so much for being here. Good luck. I know the book is already a bestseller on Amazon, and I'm sure since it just came out, it'll be on. But I'd love, to continue this conversation, because I think rethinking, everything, it's not just for leaders or politicians, or it's for those of us who are parents, for spouses, rethinking, how do we express love? Next week, we're all talking about Valentine's Day. How do we, rethink ourselves? As I've re-registered as an independent many years ago. Being a Democrat, a staunch Democrat, was so ingrained in my identity. And letting it go was almost like, I did have a physical reaction to it. So who was I if I was not an Irish Catholic Democrat, right? And I just felt that the label kept me from having these more open-minded conversations. People that approached me differently. If they're like, oh, you re-registered? Oh, I'll have a different conversation with you now. And I had all of these preconceived beliefs and thoughts about marriage, about divorce, about age, about policy, about politics, about Republicans, about Democrats, about what it meant to be a good Catholic, about all of these things that we grow up with that we don't have to carry from childhood to our 50s and 60s.
That is such a beautiful encapsulation of what I was trying to say with Think Again. And it's just amazing to me, Maria, how often we get attached to those early images of who we want to be and how we want to lead our lives, right? The version of me that decided what career I wanted and where I wanted to live and who I wanted to marry when I was, 10, 12, 14 was not that smart, right? And I know a lot more than I did then.
Yeah.
And so those images should change over time. And I love the way you've modeled that. And I think we need more rethinkers like you in the world.
Oh, thank you, Adam. Well, thank you. I'm so happy for you that you wrote this book. You have so many great blurbs on the back of it. And I think it's just great. The power, a must read, the power of knowing what you don't know. Think again. So let's keep this conversation going. And when there are subjects that you think, hey, we need to rethink that, let's get on the conversation and rethink it. Let's try to model it. Let's try to find the language. I'm a big words person. And I think if you give people the identity, like, I don't want to be a flip-flopper, I want to be a rethinker. I, want to be someone who holds my values, but I'm open to policy. Then people have a roadmap, or at least that's how it's helpful for me. And I think a lot of other people, I want to be that kind of mother. So therefore, I want to be an open-minded mother. I want to be more nurturing. Does that mean I'm weak now? So all of these things, we need language and a roadmap.
Sign me up.
Okay, great. Adam, thank you so much.
Thank
the book
you.
is a big bestseller. Think again. Don't think again. Just go buy it.
Thanks,
Thanks
Maria.
so much, Adam. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Okay. So that was a really, I thought, great discussion. Adam Grant is a lot of science in here. I haven't finished the whole book, but I was, as I said, really excited in reading the beginning of it and reading it. Thank you. This was a great conversation. Yeah, I think it's giving ourselves permission to rethink what we've been taught, the roadmap we've been on. I'm probably older than most people on here, but it's really worthwhile to rethink what you've been taught. And I think what he said is you don't have to give up everything. You don't have to, but challenge yourself. Is that still who I want to be? Is that still what I think? Is that still who I am? Or is that, as I wrote last Sunday in the Sunday paper, is that a lie to me now? Does that not fit who I am anymore? And I think that's exciting. That makes life exciting. It makes it interesting. And you got to make life interesting. You got to make it thought-provoking. And you can kind of help other people along the way and yourself. So I want to, age is just a number. Yeah, you're young. Okay, thank you so much, Matt, or who was that? I don't know who that was. Anyway, I really want to thank Adam for joining us on this Friday morning. That was a really great conversation to go into the weekend with. And maybe there's somebody that you can talk to this weekend and try those skills on. The Lincoln skills, the skills of Lincoln, the Rethinker skills. So thank you all so much. Remember, if you don't get the Sunday paper, please sign up for it. It's our weekly newsletter that inspires your heart, opens your mind, nurtures your soul, and rises above the noise to lift us all forward into what I call the open field, lifts humanity forward. And that is my mission. My hope is that our work here does that. And we try to raise up the voices of people who are trying to raise us all up, because there's plenty of places you can go where people want to divide you and bring you down. And so my goal is to lift you up to let you see that you are a light, that you have something really important to bring to the world, and you should go do it. You should go do it. So God bless you all. Have a great weekend, and thanks for joining us. Bye.